In this video I'll be making some birdhouses. I first designed what I wanted to make in SketchUp, and free plans for this build are available at the link in the description box below if you'd like to have a go at making one yourself. The plans are free for everyone, not just my Patreon subscribers, and I designed the house based on guidelines from the RSPB website, who have some really useful information about dimensions that should be used to attract specific birds for nesting in the boxes. I'll include a link for that RSPB page in the description box below too. I had some offcuts of marine plywood left over from my recent mitre station build. This will work well for exterior use as it's water resistant, so it should hold up pretty well. It was really dirty and dusty though, so I went over and sanded the pieces to get them cleaned up. I started ripping the side and bottom panels to 150mm in width. To get the shape I wanted for the birdhouse, I'd need to cut some angles at the mitre saw. First, I'd need a 35° angle where the side panels meet the roof. I'd also need to cut some 10° angles onto the bottom panel for where it meets the side panels. If you've not made anything with angled cuts before, this would be a great project to get you started thinking about how the different angles all meet together. So now I have a bottom panel that looks like this with 10° angles on two opposing edges, and two side panels with a 35° angle on one of the short edges. To assemble, I'm using some water resistant PVA wood glue. The stuff I use is Everbuild 502, and you can find links to that as well as a lot of the other stuff that I use in the My Tools section in the description box below. Here I can get the two side panels assembled to the bottom panel, and I hold them in place with some brad nails until the glue dries. Next I can make the roof panels, and unfortunately I didn't have enough marine plywood for that, so instead I decided to use some scraps of chipboard, which obviously isn't water resistant in the slightest, but that's okay because later on I'll be edging it and adding some roof felt to protect it. I ripped the pieces to 200mm wide and then cut them to length at the mitre saw, and one of the panels I cut longer than the other by the thickness of the material, which you can see here. And that's so that I can fix them together with an overlap. I added more glue, pinned them together to hold them in place temporarily, and then drilled pilot holes and added some screws to reinforce the joint. Next I can offer up the panels that I've assembled so far to the roof and check that all of my angles meet up okay, and all looked good. To make front and back panels for the box, I could position the bits I've assembled already onto some more marine plywood and then scribe a pencil line around the outside of the box part and then the inside of the roof part. And that gives me the correct shape for the front and back panels of the box. Cutting out the shape can be done easily with either a jigsaw, and I'm making sure to keep on the outside of the pencil line here so that I can refine the shape afterwards. But as I have a bandsaw, I can use that too. I can then clean up those cuts with a block plane and a bit of sanding, which is entirely optional. It's not really necessary, but it's going to make for a cleaner look. Here I'm marking up where I want the entrance to be, and you can alter the size of the hole depending on what birds you'd like to attract. In my situation, it's mainly blue tits in my garden at the moment, so I made mine 25mm based on the guidelines from RSPB, and I used a Forstner bit in the pillar drill to cut the hole, but this could easily be done just with a combi drill. Next I started to think about decorating the house, and I thought that it'd be a good idea to add masking tape first, but you'll see later on that that didn't really work out as expected. Here I'm drawing a simple door, and then I can use a V-groove bit in my router to engrave the detail into the wood. I did this freehand rather than using a straight edge to guide the cuts, and that's because I wanted the features to look kind of cartoonish in style. I'm going to be adding some spray paint to this detail, and the idea behind the masking tape was to prevent getting paint anywhere except for the engraved parts. And as you'll see, it didn't really work. It just leaked underneath the tape. So for the rest of the routing, I didn't bother using tape. Instead, I marked out what I wanted, and here I'm drawing a simple window. Then I did the routing. And after adding the paint and waiting for it to dry, I just sanded it away using a 120 grit disc on my random orbit sander. I had to be a little bit careful here not to sand through the face veneer of the plywood, and they cleaned up pretty good. As an afterthought, I also added a bit of detail around the entrance hole too. Next, I cut some mitered pieces of hardwood to use as a trim for the front edge of the roof. If I'd used marine ply, I wouldn't need to do this, but I did it to protect the chipboard from rain, and those got glued and pinned in place too. I had some small offcuts of roof felt left over from when I built my shed extension a few years ago, and I kept them aside because I knew I'd be making some bird boxes someday, and this was a great way to make use of them. That got held in place with some clout nails pinned onto the underside of the roof panels, and I cut away the excess roof felt with a sharp knife. Finally, I added some finish to the bird boxes, and here I'm using a hard wax oil that's specifically for exterior use with UV protection. You just rub it on as thinly as possible with a cloth, and it will provide a hard wearing finish that hopefully will stop the wood fading so quickly from the sunlight. A wood finish like this is expensive, but you don't really need to apply finish to this at all. I'm just using it because I want my bird boxes to look good and last as long as possible. To fit the roof to the box, I decided to use some Velcro strips, which I just stapled onto the top edge of the box and the underside of the roof, and that will hold it in place and also allow me to clean out the bird boxes after every breeding season. It's also quite loose fitting, which is actually a recommendation because it allows for better ventilation inside the box. I fitted a keyhole fixing to the back of the box so that I can mount it onto the walls using just a screw. These are really handy and they just screw in place. These boxes aren't particularly heavy, and obviously birds aren't either, so one screw to secure these boxes will be fine. I added my maker's mark to the bottom of the box. And finally, here I'm marking up for some ventilation holes to the bottom panel. 4 holes should be fine, 1 in each corner. To fit the box, I used the hammer setting on my combi drill to drill a hole. I then added a roll plug, and added a screw for that keyhole fixing to slot onto. I made a few of these bird boxes because this build was all about killing 2 birds, if you'll excuse the pun, with 1 stone. Firstly, I made one for my mum because she asked me to make one for her a long time ago, and I just kept putting it off. And secondly, I kept spotting some blue tits outside the French doors of our office, which is where I sit and edit my videos, and every morning they would repeatedly fly around one of the walls as if they were looking for somewhere to nest. That wall is north facing, and according to the RSPB page, they like to either nest facing north or east for optimal weather conditions. So I wondered if they were looking for somewhere to nest, and that's why I put making some bird boxes further up my priority list, because I really wanted our garden to be a welcoming place for wildlife, and also it'll give me some entertainment watching them come and go through my window. And they didn't disappoint, because after only a couple of days of me putting them up, I saw a blue tit investigating both of the houses, which was really exciting. Eventually I'll also put some feeders out there too at some point before the winter sets in. To be honest, I wasn't really super impressed with how these bird boxes turned out. They're okay, I suppose. I like the shape of the boxes, but I kind of had an idea in my head of how I wanted them to look with the cartoonish style windows and doors, but they don't look as good as I'd hoped. But that doesn't really matter. As long as the birds like them, and hopefully my mum too, that's all that really matters. This was a pretty quick and simple project. Making all 3 was just over half a day's work, and I made them entirely from offcuts and stuff that I already had, so they didn't cost much to put together. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope I inspired some of you to make your own bird boxes, whether it's using my plans or designing your own. It really is quite rewarding making something like this and seeing it get used by local wildlife. I really do get a lot of pleasure from it. Please subscribe to my channel for more weekly woodworking videos. If you'd like to support the channel on Patreon, you can receive early access to my videos, exclusive content, free plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos too. Thank you for watching. I don't know if you caught some distant meowing then, I don't know whether the microphone picked that up, but Dylan was at the door and wanted to come in. So Dylan says hello and see you soon.